Okay, you are live.
All right. Good evening. I call this meeting to order on Tuesday, June 15th, 2023 at 7:05
Thursday.
p.m. Oh, it's Thursday, excuse me, that's Thursday. Thank you. Thursday, June 15th at 7:05 p.m. I'm going to first do roll call. So roll call, is there member Eileen Leahy present?
Present.
Okay, wonderful. How about our member Debbie Yashik?
Yes,
Is she present?
present.
Oh, wonderful too. Okay, I myself, Keanu Smith Brown, chair is also present. Moving forward onto the agenda, there were no comments submitted as far as I believe. So we're just going to move on forward. That's correct, right, Madam Clerk? I just want to make
You are
sure.
correct.
Okay. Is there a motion though? Hopefully everyone has had the opportunity to look over those minutes. I'm actually
There
looking.
weren't any minutes.
I was gonna say, I'm actually looking.
Right.
I didn't see any minutes, so
And no agenda, right?
I did.
Yeah.
We do have the agenda,
Okay.
though the minutes were not there, so that's okay. Maybe
Well,
we can hold.
I'll move to postpone the approval of minutes for 5/23/23 till the next meeting in July.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second for that?
Second,
Okay, all in favor? Myself.
aye.
I myself. Okay, let's move on then to updates and discussion. The first order of business on here is we have an update for the meetings of task force to study the city and municipal elections. If there aren't any comments first, please, Eileen, feel free to begin to share with us if you can.
Okay, well, since we last met, there've been two meetings. There was a meeting on May 24th. And also a meeting last evening. So May 24th was really just kind of a review of a number of items. Last night's meeting, Jared DeMoranis, who was just made the administrator for the State Board of Elections, spoke with the group. He spoke for about a half an hour and gave answered a lot of really good questions in terms of what can be done within the, if we were to change some things in the municipal elections, such as open primaries, changing voting age, things like that, what can be done and when. It sounds like there was nothing that couldn't be done, but I think one of the real takeaways was some of these changes would require legislation at the state level. So it's not as easy as just putting it into city code and then doing it. So the takeaway I took from it was it's going to take longer depending on what the task force recommends. But certain things such as, like I said, an open primary would be, it's potentially possible, but it would require state legislation. I took away from what he talked about also that they would very much, and he has said this before, very much like to see the municipal elections sync in with the state of the presidential elections to make things easier. One option he gave, which I thought was interesting, was, and actually David had given this option in a different sense, that I know people are concerned about having the municipal elections down ballot, but apparently there's at least one jurisdiction or one municipality that they do it in two separate rooms or two separate locations. So you go in and you say vote for the presidential ballot in one room, and then you go over and get a second ballot. So it's not that the two ballots are combined, but there's two separate ballots. So there's pluses and minuses to that. We talked about partisan versus nonpartisan. We talked about finance. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, and one of the task force members, Andrew Miller, asked it about the effect of artificial intelligence on the elections. And that was not something that I had really thought about, but really does have an impact, particularly in getting correct information out to voters. And that really ties in with things like authority lines and understanding what's being put out by the candidate versus opponents versus third parties. And that's something that they'll be addressing at the state level, but that's one of the things on the horizon. We also asked about technology as far as updates. The technology is scheduled to be updated in 2025. How that will impact a municipality remains unclear, because many of the things we've asked for in the past, such as same-day registration or some other things, we haven't really had access to, because it can't, the state has not agreed to adapt the system to a municipality. So those were some of the things that were brought up. Another item on the agenda was talking about moving forward. The task force is very aware that they're halfway through their tenure. And so they're going to be looking at doing a work session at its next meeting on Wednesday, June 28th. And so that will be Hillary and Regina and I are meeting tomorrow to talk about that. A work session differs from a meeting in that there can be public attendance, but there's no public comments. And so in the past, the ones I've been in don't necessarily get recorded. So we'll be working on that and trying to kind of pull apart some of the major areas to start working on. The third area that was discussed was community outreach. Andrew White, Faye Gaskins, and I have formed a subcommittee. We met this morning, and we are working with Mitchell Stevenson to put together a survey that will be available in a couple of modalities. One will be, if we get the funding for it, would be to do an all digital campaign and use some geofencing on social media to try to capture feedback from people from social media. It's not going to be a scientific survey. We're really not in a position to do that at this point, but to merely look at surveys, merely look at trends. So we're pretty much limited to 10 questions, and the 10 questions, we're looking at are things like asking people how they would like to vote in the Annapolis elections, whether that be receive a mail-in ballot automatically, request a ballot by mail or in person, looking at syncing the Annapolis elections, nonpartisan versus partisan, open primary voting, non-citizen residents registering to vote, term limits for city council members, and see what else. I think those are the major ones. There were a couple others, such as lowering the age to vote to 16 years, that may not make the cut just because we're pretty limited to 10. If we can go more, we'll include that. We can't get a lot of demographics. So the type of demographics that we were trying to look at was to ask people what ward they live in, and then to ask them if they're registered to be a Democrat, Republican, Independent, other, or not registered. And so we'll get some feel for that. So we'll be working on that, along with the list for community organizations and groups has been greatly expanded on the website. And so we're looking at sending out a blast email for that group, and then to try to identify at least 2 groups in each ward that will get a more personal follow-up. So we're just trying, that will be a secondary part of the survey to drive people to the survey on the website. So there'll be the digital campaign on social media, and then they'll be trying to drive people to the survey. We also talked about having the ability for anyone that needs to get a paper survey sent to them. We can set that up, but really try to get the survey. It'll probably, if all goes well, it won't get out until probably mid-July, which is not optimal, but hopefully people, with computers, if they get the message, they can fill that out, and then we'll look at the data over the summer. So that's kind of where we are. I'll be sending out an email asking people if there's certain groups that they want to add to the list. And I think that's pretty much it between the 3 meetings. Any questions?
Yeah, I was just ready. Thank you, Eileen. That was very thorough. I really appreciate that update and giving that information, everything you've been doing. Debbie, did you have any questions?
No, I did listen to the last night's meeting. I listened to that today. So So it was interesting, and Eileen captured it well.
Oh, good.
Mhm.
We also did ask Mr. Peck from the Municipal Maryland League to attend, and he sent in some information, and I can forward that to you. It really, it's kind of what his standard has been, is that, yes, there's most of the municipalities are nonpartisan, but we got the sense that they're not in a position really to assist us as much as we had hoped.
Mm.
Scott Gibson is taking the lead on looking into the pluses and minuses of partisan versus nonpartisan elections. And then we
Okay.
also Jared did give us a follow-up or a contact to look into the whole question of the Hatch Act, which the city of Annapolis Office of Law has weighed in one respect. So we're going to see contact probably the Office of the Special Counsel. So that was also helpful.
Okay.
Anything you want me to bring back to them?
Mm. Well, just that I think they do have kind of a sense of urgency now, right? It started a little slow and sluggish, getting to know each other, but I think they realize they're on the halfway point, and the priorities and things need to start happening. And also they want to meet in person, as do we. So now that the garage is open, hopefully that can happen. And I know, the task force is talking about a chance for them to kind of brainstorm and have a work session
Right.
to hammer out some of these priorities.
Right. I think that we realize that they're going to be able to make some recommendations, but which we can get into on our next agenda item, but there's certain priorities that I think we as the Board of Supervisors of Elections are going to need to probably jumpstart a few things. We won't be able to wait for kind of an overhaul, so to speak. And there is kind of some momentum for maybe adopting the state code, but that's not a sure thing. And there's also some things that need to be addressed on an individual basis with that. So I don't want to speak for the task force, so we'll be getting more information. So nothing else necessary to bring back to them?
I was gonna say, with sharing it out to the organizations, do you all, or will you be helping to spread the word to also the elected officials, or at least our legislators, to also put out to their groups and networks in the
Yes.
area?
Yes.
Okay, so when we think about, and maybe this is something, Debbie, we can think about too after they have their session, because I'm sure this won't be the only session that they have, but making sure that there's a scope of doing the best, because we are human and we have biases, but doing our best, especially when we talk about partisan and nonpartisan,
Of course.
it's key to not not to just have a one scope view on that, especially from the articles that have been put out there in support of it, and the constant conversation surrounding the pro of nonpartisan. So as long as that focus is not going to be just bias, I'm all in support of it and for the conversation to be had and the information to be shared. And I'm glad you mentioned pros and cons to both. And hopefully it's just as informational for both sides. And that's one thing. And then for the next item on the agenda, I think this will really help, Eileen, because you'll be helping us to move this forward. And, you take the lead in helping us in this conversation about our focus and priorities from your experience of being the chair, and, the timeline that we need to really get in check, to make sure that we're not behind and that we're ahead of this, even before, as you mentioned, the task force comes out with a recommendation. So I think this is an important piece, and maybe we can keep this on our agenda for the next couple of meetings up until the task force is finished. But if I don't really have anything else to take back, except for um, I have been watching all the meetings, and I definitely want to make sure we're diving really deep into making sure that the voters are the most important part of this. And it's all about making sure that they have access to voting, they have the information and the education in regards to voting, and we do everything we can to put that in place for them. So let's move on to that discussion if there's nothing else from anybody on the task force. Thanks, Eileen. Um, so yeah, focus and priorities discussion leading up to the task force's recommendations and the 2025 election. It's coming. So where and maybe we can begin and possibly draft document or something after tonight's conversation. But where should we begin? Where do you feel that how soon did you all begin planning for the election? I know it was at least a year and a half
We
before, if not
planned the
2
day
years.
we started.
So the day we started.
It
So
takes 4 years to plan a thing. There are a number of things we need to decide. One is what kind of election we're going to run. I think that it's really important for us to be cognizant that there's been a lot of changes in voting, not just at our level, but in the other levels. And so looking at making things accessible, convenient, secure, and understandable. So for example, the state now allows you to opt in for receiving a mail-in ballot. So you have three choices. You can automatically get a mail-in ballot. You can also request a ballot be sent to you. And then there's in-person. So I think it's important as we move forward in the 2025 election that we try to be somewhat consistent with the state as best we can, because otherwise it creates a lot of confusion for voters. So, for instance, I would be concerned that there are people that are expecting us automatically to send them a ballot because they opted in at let me back up. Let's say we decide just to do an in-person, a traditional election. So that means the people that opted in to receive a mail-in ballot from the county may be expecting a ballot to be sent to them, and it won't. So how do we communicate to them that that won't happen? On the other hand, how do we maybe work with the county to say, can we say that anybody that opted in for a mail-in ballot with you all at the county level will automatically get one from us? Does that make sense?
right.
Now,
And-
the option of sending out a ballot request. So say I want to have the choice decide with each election if I want a ballot. And I decide, yes, I want to vote by mail. And that actually becomes an absentee ballot. Okay, so mail-in ballots and absentee ballots are different. They're both forms of voting by mail, but they're different processes. The challenge for us in Annapolis is we don't have a lot of time between the primary and the general. So we can do some of them. I mean, they can handle maybe a couple of hundred requests so that if they get a request to get, the county has to send the request has to be signed and sent back to the county, and then the ballot needs to go to the person, and then the person needs to submit the ballot. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a tight timeline when you have your primary in September and you have your general in November. So that raises the question of, do we want to consider moving the primary to say May or June, which would also be consistent with what the state is doing. In the last election, Alderman Savage requested that the primary be moved up. However, it was done kind of late in the process, and it just it just wasn't as feasible. But those are the types of things that we need to think about. The other things that we need to think about is that I would not be surprised if we have a number of ballot questions on this upcoming election, such as what the Charter Revision Commission has suggested about syncing in with the presidential or state elections, and also partisan versus nonpartisan. So it may come out with this work session. We say, we think that's a good idea. Let the voters decide. If that's true, the way the current code is written is that it talks about doing it, but it doesn't really give us a good process.
Mhm.
So all of these things are going to require legislation. And yes, we've said we want to wait until the task force comes out. And ideally, the task force would be at a place and at that time have the ability to pay, maybe do something bigger, but I'm not sure they will. And I'm not sure we can wait and do that. If it turns out they can, it's no time. It's just that we've been better prepared. So I think between now and September, when the city council starts, we need to really think about what type of legislation we want to get in front of them. Because the election calendar is dependent on that. So right now, the election calendar, correct me if I'm wrong, Regina, probably starts in August of 2024.
Yes.
So let's say that, but it's all dependent, the way our code is written, it's dependent on different dates, like 30 days from this date. So let's say we move the primary to say May or June. I believe that would move the election calendar closer to like January of 2024, which is less than a year away. So we need to think really hard about what legislation we need, if we need legislation, what legislation we need, and we need to be ready in September to get going on it, because if we don't get it through in time, there is the potential that the only option we have is in person. And that may be the option we choose. We may decide we're just going to do in person again, but these are discussions that we need to be having and thinking about.
Right. Now, what really creates the movement on this? Is it that, okay, we talk about our options and we agree on that option, we move, and we pass that, and then we, find some alderpersons to support this? If it's in a package, do we, make our suggestions to the task force as well, so that we're all in sync for when they come out with their recommendations? How would we approach
We
this?
start with us. We start with us, and that really, comes from the chair taking the lead on that. And
Okay.
that's something we should be doing in the next couple of months, and then seeing what the task force comes out with and see what meshes and what doesn't mesh and how it works. But if we wait for the task force and then start discussing these things, we've already missed the boat. We're already too late. So we need to be thinking about what type of election we think we're going to want. Again, there are several options.
Right.
The simplest might be just to conduct an in-person and make sure that everybody knows they're not going to get a mail-in ballot. We're just going to do in-person. On the other hand, people have liked mail-in. But these are types of things we have to do. We also have to be prepared to talk with the county in terms of starting the memo of understanding, which takes months. So in our July meeting, and if we meet in August, we need to be working on this. We can talk about having our own work session if you want to do that, or we just do it in the meeting.
No, please, let's do a work set. I'm glad you say that, because I know Debbie was talking about meeting in person.
Yeah.
And from last night's meeting, I thought the same, that, do we want to have a work session? And if so, I don't think we're really in a place or necessarily need guests to join us at any of our upcoming meetings, because I think, Eileen, you really can carry that for us. But when it comes to meeting, I think we should have that work session in person, and that could be our next meeting, really, for July.
Well, the other thing that came out of working on the community outreach and the survey is that there were a number of questions that we might want to consider from the operations that aren't related to code or charter. And it made me realize that one of the things that would have been interesting to do right after the last election was to ask things like, did you get enough information about your polling
Yeah.
place? How did, what is your preference in terms of mail-in and those sorts of things? So we might want to think about doing a survey if we wanted to do a time, but that really has to do with more operations, things like same day registration and all of that. And I'm not sure. That's something to think about. We may have waited too long to consider doing something like that, but to get a feel for other types of things that maybe voters want. We can try to drive, we just don't get people coming to our meetings. Now, if we were doing in person, maybe that changed, but historically, as Regina says, people don't think about elections until it's elections.
Yeah.
Well, in regards to the survey, I know you said it's kind of pretty strict to that, those 10 questions. But if that survey is going out by the task force, do you think if we incorporated any of these important questions into that, is that too much to incorporate our questions into
We already
theirs?
took them out
Yeah,
because the focus of the task force is on code, not on
how they elect, yeah, right.
not some of the logistics and things like that. So again, I think we need to just talk about what we're thinking of. And those were the four: the type of election, the primary date, the MOU are the three. I have the three priorities.
Okay.
Regina, can you think of anything else that's really more pressing?
Locations,
let me-
oh, excuse me, Madam Clerk.
Oh, I'm sorry. David Garris did ask me to send him the draft copy of the 2025 election calendar that we finished already.
Mhm.
So I'm going to send that to him, but so he's going to start working on his end because we have to have something.
Right, and also the state just changed, they just updated their summary guide to 2022. And I talked with Ashley about if she would have the time to look at that and incorporate, compare it with the city code, and that was something that was going to go for the task force, but unfortunately she can't get to it for a couple of weeks. So I'm going to take a quick look at it. But that's probably something that David's going to be looking at too. They try to look to see what we're in sync with, but there's going to be new things at the state level that are going to be different than what we're going to be doing. And I don't think we're going to have the ability to get that type of legislation in
Yeah,
time.
slim, right?
Because you have to remember the council is on recess in August.
Right. So we need to hit the ground running in September.
Yes, nothing moving in August. Yeah.
Do you, Madam Clerk, would you be willing to also share, just so that we can have it in our email, that election calendar with us?
Sure.
Send it over to. Oh, wonderful.
Is it on the website now?
No, because it's a draft. It's a draft for 2025. So we don't want, that's not a public document.
Okay.
It's just our working document.
Okay. Well, thanks. I think that'd be helpful and for everybody. And then for the conversation about these priorities, is everyone willing to have a work session in July for our next meeting?
Yeah.
Because if so, we would need a motion I believe, to have an in-person work session for our next meeting. And would this would be public, that they can hear this and listen?
They can attend and listen, but they don't provide testimony.
No comment, right?
Exactly. They wanted to attend, they could attend, but it would not be put in any virtual form. They couldn't do it.
So that's okay. Well, is there a motion then to do that so that we can at least have that on the books?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that our next meeting be a committee work session on July 20th.
Okay, second.
Good, awesome. Is there?
I guess 7 p.m.
Okay, that is the question. Are we going to stick with the same time? Do we want to do earlier? Is that possible?
Yeah, I'm flexible.
So if it's next Thursday, is that Thursday and the 20th?
Yeah, that's the third Thursday.
Right. We can stick with 7, or if anyone's available for maybe 5:30, 6 o'clock, that could work for me. Madam Clerk, will we have to confirm with the videographer? Would we
let me just say the city council has their work session on the third Thursdays of the month. So their work session runs from 3 to 5. So it would kind of be really, tight trying to get you started at 5:30. Okay. So if you wanted to start at 6 o'clock, I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay. Is that
okay? Because sometimes they run over their work session just a little bit, but you never know depending on the topic.
And this would be in person somewhere, right?
Yes, in the chamber.
Okay.
So, Debbie, would you be willing to have that motion include the time of 6 o'clock? I know you were right in the middle of your motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just gonna check a calendar.
Make sure it's right on the calendar.
Yeah, that's fine. We were going to be in Oklahoma. We were leaving that day for Oklahoma City to be to row in the national U.S. Masters Nationals Regatta. But our team just decided not to go this year. So it was on the calendar. I would not be here, but yeah, 6 o'clock would be fine.
Okay. Well, I know if at first that motion was moved and seconded, but going on back, that motion, I take it we're saying it's to have our meeting on July 20th at 6 o'clock p.m. Eileen, would you be willing to second that?
I did second it.
Okay, I'm just confirming. Okay, all in favor of that? Myself. Aye. All right, awesome. And other than that, would you recommend us bringing some research or any types of information or some thoughts? Of course, we can bring with our brains there, but is there anything that you think we should lay out or have in hand for this meeting? Or should we just
reread the code and read the summary guide from the state and look at
Okay.
the election code. You could also look at the candidate handbook, but there's lots of resources.
Okay. Well, if there is, that's what we will do. Look forward to finally meeting us all together for the first time in this capacity. Is there then any more conversation on this matter? I think this would really set us up for everything we really need, having this in-person work session. Okay. Well, if there's nothing further, let's head on out, going towards adjournment. So is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I motion to adjourn the meeting at 7:37, June 15th of the Board of Supervisors of Elections.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll call on this marvelous Thursday. Blessings. All in favor? Myself.
Aye.